Hey Bradley,
Hi, how are you?
good. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I actually attended I think the NeuroSim. I had to drop out. Wait, I didn't. I actually was studying for my GRE, and then my coordinator said it's not required, and then I just like I had the other academic stuff he told me to do, and then I just went on to that. It was like almost 3 days before GRE told me not to write, and then just went with that.
Oh,
Hi.
hi. Well, that's too bad about the GRE. Hey, Furkan and Jesse. Okay. I think Rashab is going to be joining us as well. I don't know if, but well, welcome, Furkan.
Thank you.
I don't think you've ever been in a meeting. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a master's graduate from computer engineering in Turkey. Now I'm transitioning to more the cognitive neuroscience, and I'm planning to do a PhD in France, Toulouse. I'm trying to figure out what can I do in my PhD thesis, and I'm in the exploration phase.
Good. Well, welcome. Hi, Anson.
Hello.
Okay, so that's good. Jesse's there. It's muted. So welcome to the meeting. Today we're going to talk about maybe Jesse will give a short update if people want to give a short update about what they've been up to, and then we'll get into the submissions, some of the papers that we're working on in abstracts. So, does anyone have any updates they'd like to share?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, nice to see you, Furkan.
Thank you. Nice to see you too.
And everybody else here today. Yeah, I won't be able to say a lot because I don't have a full connection here right now. But I've mostly been fleshing out some of my own projects that I've been talking to Bradley about, and I I might not be able to go into them right now, but also I might have a little bit more to say later because I'm not fully prepared at the moment. But I've been working on some. I've been working on a draft of a manuscript for going over some of the things that came about this summer. Bradley mentioned the gradient.pub work before, so I'm working on a draft for that to go over kind of a lot of the things that happened this summer in terms of like major events and machine learning related stuff. Like iClear. I was able to go to iClear and the Bridging AI and Cognitive Science workshop, and that kind of inspired a lot of things. And then obviously NeuroMatch. I think we all can know about that. The conferences in the academy. So I'm putting together something for that, and I'm trying to finish that as well as a general blog for the NeuroMatch Academy that I've been had for a while. And I want to get all this stuff out of my head as fast as I can because we have stuff going on, and I think that's kind of the most exciting stuff. Things that are coming up in the lab with the submissions that are at hand, and the workshop and the paper that I don't know if you guys have looked at the draft submissions or the draft paper for the
Jesse? Oh,
We'll talk more about that. Huh?
oh, you're breaking up there.
What's?
Your
Oh,
voice.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
But just excited for things ahead. I probably won't say much because my connection isn't the greatest at the moment, it seems. But other than that, I would say some cool stuff came up yesterday and Anson can maybe say more about this if he wants to, but we kind of cross-referenced some things in there's an interdisciplinary humanities group, journal club that we studied quite a bit of like embodied cognition related stuff earlier this year with them, and there was a really interesting paper. Maybe Anson can talk about that if he wants to, about basically I forgot what it was called, something like active inference and social cognition, and something about hermeneutics. Anson, is that what it's called?
It's active inference and activism and the hermeneutics of social cognition.
Yeah, it broke down some things like predictive processing, predictive coding, and they made something else called predictive engagement and applied it to different ways of looking at things. It's kind of philosophical, but it's still interesting. And we got in a little bit of a discussion about virtual reality things, and it reminded me of we mentioned some of the stuff Bradly talked about, and I mentioned specifically the paper last week, I think it was, about virtual travels. So, and how perceptions change depending on the stature or the embodiment of the virtual agent in an environment. So, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff there. That's probably all I'll say because I'd like to hear what other people are up to. And I might chime in later, but that's my general update. If there's anything that I'm missing, you can say, hey, you should talk about that, but I think that's probably enough.
Okay. It's good. Anson, did you have anything?
I don't have that much to add on the what Justin was talking about. I think there are a lot of interesting leads there. I'll flip through my notes quickly. I think overall it was just a good theoretical overview on different camps that are trying to model where cognition is located and the differences in interpretation that lead to and are implied by these different camps. I think I definitely have a lot of things that I want to return to from that paper. Overall, I've been busy with my coursework. The couple of weeks have been doing okay, but I'm a little behind. It's getting used to it's weird to be honest, it's weird to have all online coursework. Well, mostly, and it can feel less grounded. But I think my coursework is really interesting. Taking, in particular, the artificial intelligence class, like even just the first lecture, which is like overview of the history of artificial intelligence, and I think that would be definitely something that I'd want to return to. I think that had a lot of interesting, relevant points to the lab. Just another course to do the basics of Python. Another one is going over software development methodologies and paradigms.
That's good. Yeah, so that sounds like a pretty good course load. Yeah. Well, thanks for the update. Furkan, I mean, I know you're new here, but if you had anything you wanted to add.
Like I'm working on, like I said, exploring the topics in the between the cognitive neuroscience and AI, like mostly I have looked at the neural decoding and the predictive coding topics, like the papers from there. Like my PhD advisor is Rufin van Rollen. I don't know if you ever heard of it. He like studies these topics like neural decoding and the predictive coding. I'm trying to explore these topics from the recent papers that are published. That's all I do right now.
Good. Well, thanks. Ash, do you have anything interesting going on?
Nothing much, but I just thought like the previous, you texted something in the Slack about submission of an abstract. So I thought that was my last update, and then I was kind of not very much following the NeuroSim, and I think maybe I would get something along this week.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So thanks for the updates. Why don't I start? I'll go through the things now that I was going to mention in the... Let me share my screen here. You can see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is actually, okay. So yeah, NMA 3.0 is coming up. It's neuromatch.io. So I know that you probably know where this is. They update the main page, but we might look at that page for a minute. So this is NeuroMatch 3.0. This is the next iteration of this. So it's the registration date is before October 25th. The submission date is before October 2. So it's this coming Friday. So the plan is that Jesse is going to submit an abstract for the group, this group. And if people want to be on it, they can contribute by going over the abstract and suggesting changes. And then, we can work on once the submission has been made of the abstract, we can work on the talk. The main conference is October 26th through 30th. So that gives maybe about a month to go from a abstract to maybe a 20-minute talk, 15 to 20-minute talk. And so if you want to submit something on your own, you're welcome to do that. There's one submission per person. So, if you're interested in submitting something, you can submit, but you can only submit once. And I think they're going to vote on the submissions. So the agenda is here. I don't know if they have anything. There really aren't too many abstracts in yet, so they don't have anything yet. But then there's, I guess, this registration fee of $25. If you can't pay it, you just say I can't pay it. I think it's it's voluntary, not required. And so the way this will work, I guess they have the themes set out. They're like 6 themes: development, neurodegenerative disorders, and injury. So this might be a place for the Developmental AI Abstract, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I probably would be more likely to be in computation. But so there's development, neurodegenerative disorders, and injury, which is, I think, a lot of medical research, a lot of you'll see when the conference happens. There's a whole area of regenerative medicine and all that. So that'll probably be what will be in that category. Theme B will be neuroexcitability, synapses, and glia. So I guess that's a lot of the stuff in the brain that's, related to action potential firing and things that are supporting the production of action potentials and the health of cells and the electrical activity of cells and everything. So that's another theme that I don't know how many people in this group are that familiar with, but this what happened this time is that normally there's a meeting called Society for Neuroscience, or SFN, and they were going to have their meeting you usually have it in November, but this year, because of the pandemic, they've canceled. And so they didn't replace it with a virtual conference. And so NeuroMatch decided to fill the void of SFN by sort of expanding out. So that's why they have all these tracks. And this is kind of like the way SFN is structured. Normally, SFN has like 35, 40,000 attendees. That's a lot of attendees and a lot of tracks. So I don't know. This is really scaling up NeuroMatch even from what it was in the first two. So going back to the themes, we have the third theme, which is sensory motor systems and physiology behavior. And again, this is like stuff like motor control, motor learning. There are other areas that are, pretty physiological. Then there's cognition, motivation, and emotion. And so this is more social cognition, maybe, or like cognitive neuroscience. Theme E is computation and technique. So this is like computational modeling, AI, things like that. And then history, education, and society. So this is theme F. This is an interesting theme because you don't usually think about it in NeuroMatch terms because they didn't have it in the first two conferences. But that might be interesting, at least for Jesse and Anson to attend. I don't know if Anson wants to submit something to this track, but it's it'll be a good opportunity to get your work out to a broader audience. So again, we're submitting one group abstract, and then if anyone wants to submit on their own, they're welcome to it. I encourage you to submit something, in one of these tracks if you have an idea. You'll have to produce a talk, but I think it'll be worth your time. Finally, there's a virtual job board. So if you're looking for a job, there's stuff on careers here. So that's the basic conference outline. So now I have an idea here that if people are interested, they can get back with me on this. So I'm kind of revisiting this complexity of feedback group. As you know, we've been talking about this. This is the complexity of feedback loops project here. This was the project that we started during NeuroMatch, and we had worked out like some ideas of how to implement this. So we have a data set that's the mouse IBL data set, and we want to look and see if we can, do some analysis with the data. And so one of the ideas we had, of course, was to build these feedback loops from the data to test hypotheses about what's going on in the brain of the mouse. Is there some sort of is it just a simple stimulus response mapping, or is there stuff that's more complex going on? So you have these zero order representations, these first order representations, and these higher order representations, and they represent things in the brain that are almost like black boxes, but they're just variables that we would test against one another. And so we might apply a model to, in the higher order representation, we might apply a computational model in the response to, model that versus the stimulus. So that was the idea. And we've moved a little bit on it. We've talked about it. One of the things we might do for this, though, to move it forward, and I understand people don't have time. It's not like I'm the top of my list either to move it forward. But one of the things we might do is to write up a blog post for publication. So we have these tasks that we have put in this board for this project. So the blog post would be one of those tasks. We'd write up a short blog post that might describe the project. It might, there might be we might link it to something else in the real world to make it more concrete to people. And then I like this meta issue, update the project board. And so we have to figure out to do this blog post, you have to figure out which issues we want to solve or address, maybe address new issues, and then write up a blog post. And then the idea would be to publish it during NMA 3.0, which is at the end of the month, or at the end of October or at the beginning of November. And then with all the buzz going on around NMA, we can put it in and kind of mention NMA and, maybe get some ideas, feedback on what we're thinking. So this would just be like maybe a next step in terms of driving this project forward, saying, we have these ideas for doing this with the data. We're not presenting a formal analysis, but just something that would be, enough for someone to give feedback on it. To say that's a great idea, or maybe it isn't a great idea, or, you could do it this way or that way. And so that would help, I think, move this project forward, because I'm not sure what exactly the best way to do this analysis is. Sometimes, you need that sort of, feedback in the process to really get where you want to go, because it's hard to know exactly what's the most relevant sort of, even when you're dealing with a data set where you already have data collected, it's hard to know how to actually approach the data. And so this might help us in that direction. And so I'll leave this issue open. This is issue, I think, 70 on the board. Yeah, it's number 70 on this board here. And I will put it up in the chat so that people can reference that board. And so if you're interested, let me know. So that's the first thing about NeuroMatch. So this again is at the end of October. So we have roughly a month to produce like a 20-minute talk or something. And these abstracts have to be submitted by the 2nd, which is this coming Friday. So let's go over the abstracts real quick first. So we have 2 abstracts. The first one is the Developmental AI Abstract, which I think I put up a link in the general chat in Slack in the general channel. And this document has 2 abstracts. So the first one is Approaching Artificial Intelligence as an Embodied Developmental Process. So the shorthand for that is Developmental AI. And if you have a better idea for a title, you can suggest it in the chat as a comment in this document. So let me put the document link here in the chat. And we can go over, or you can go over it after the meeting or whenever and make comments. So if you want to make a comment, you click on Add Comment, you highlight your area, and you make a comment. It's, so it should be easy enough to do, and then I can incorporate them all at the end. And so, let's see, in this submission, we will lay out an argument for building artificial intelligence based on biological development. A developmental AI consists of 3 components: an embodied input-output network, a critical period for information acquisition and connectivity, and a network topology that expands over time according to the principles of contingency and developmental freedom. And so these things will be defined in the talk. I think maybe these could be defined. I mean, they should be defined in the abstract, but we can decide where to define it. So contingency is the idea that things that happen before other things are sort of lock you into a certain path. So, if you think about there are a lot of events that happen that rely on prior events. A lot of times you'll hear the term historical contingency, which means if some event happens, like a war, you have a certain set of outcomes. If some event happens, like the automobile was invented, then another set of outcomes happens. And so all those outcomes are dependent on something that came earlier. Whereas developmental freedom is the idea that you have these degrees of freedom in the developmental process, and that they can unfold in equal fashion so that there's no bias towards one outcome or another. So that's what those terms mean. And maybe so we have enough room in this abstract. We have something like let's see how many words we have. We have 182 words, so we have like, I think 300 words. So we have a lot of room to add things or change things around. So then the next sentence is, we will demonstrate examples for each of these points up here, but using developmental Brainwork vehicles. And so for those of you who don't know, we've been working on this paradigm called developmental Brainwork vehicles, which is where you have a standard Brainwork vehicle, which is a toy model of a nervous system in a vehicle with wheels and sensors. And the original Brainwork vehicles were these models of like a mind or a robot, but they're a thought experiment that suggests that if you build this simple nervous system, you can generate simple behaviors. And so there's this very transparent nervous system in the vehicle. And so the vehicle then will do things like show attraction to light, or show repulsion to their neighbors, or whatever, depending on the way it's wired inside. And so the developmental case of this is where we start with like a simple input-output mapping, and we expand out by adding connections within it. And so that's what this is based on. And so we'll see in the baby minds abstract what that kind of, how that unfolds. So this is going to be, like I said, we're going to introduce some thought experiments based on this developmental Brainwork vehicles model. These thought experiments will take the form of a contingency analysis of a typical DBV input-output network topology. So this is this developmental Brainwork vehicle. What does the network look like? There's a way that we can analyze it by thinking about what comes first and what leads to certain outcomes. This analysis shows how embodied developmental agents provide three potentially powerful mechanisms. That's actually not a very good sentence, but we can make a note there that says, I think I'm getting at these three up here, but yeah, we can fix that. Oh, actually, no, these down here, I'm sorry. But this is, maybe this could be clearer. So first, the presence of an embodied input-output network can act as structure input data. So this is like where you have input data coming in the sensors, and it's structuring the data with with this network inside of the vehicle. Secondly, the existence of a critical period embedded within the developmental process acts as structure association building through network complexity. So for Furkan's benefit, I can talk about what a critical period is. The critical period is this period of development where you have like an enhanced ability to learn things. So development is, you have a lot of things that form in development. You have behaviors, you have nervous system components, you have connections, but there are periods in certain, in different organisms, you have different periods called the critical period, where when you have this critical period, it's a certain period where, environmental stimuli are critical to shaping the general neural network that you have. So there are examples in like early visual development, where the visual system has a critical period where if you don't have stimulation during that period, you end up with a very different neural network than you would if you had stimulation. So they've done experiments where they've taken the eyes out of rat embryos or rat, rats that haven't been born yet. They take the eyes out, and then they let them experience early vision or early visual development without eyes. And so then they look at the cortex of these mice, and they see that they have this massive plasticity in their cortex. They have a visual area, but the visual area is used for hearing and touch and things like that. So all the inputs from like that would normally go, say, just to auditory cortex will also use visual cortex. And, you can see this in other sensory modalities as well, like audition, where if you have a congenitally blind genotype, you end up with a different type of wiring pattern in the auditory cortex. And so these developmental points matter, and especially at the critical period in terms of acquiring behavior, acquiring information, and then ultimately the what the wiring diagram looks like. So that's a basic idea there. And, this can be made clearer in terms of words, but this is, of course, going to be like a set of slides, so we'll have a lot of opportunity to show images of this stuff. So, so we talked about the critical period, we talked about input-output networks, structuring data, and then finally, developmental freedom results from the placement of the critical period, which we talked about, within the sequence of events defining the developmental process. I think this is a run-on sentence, but we can fix this. So then this this can enhance both information acquisition and network structure. Okay, maybe that's a better way to put it. So let me read that over. Finally, developmental freedom results from the placement of the critical period within the sequence of events defining the developmental process, which can enhance both information acquisition, and network structure. So this is a summary of these 2 points, but kind of pulling it home, which is that developmental freedom, or the freedom to choose different developmental paths, results from the placement of the critical period within a sequence of events, defining the developmental process, which in turn can enhance both information acquisition and network structure. So, so this is the idea that the critical period can affect the developmental path that you go down. And it can also restrict the total set of developmental paths that you can pick from. If I don't think anyone in this group is familiar with an epigenetic landscape. Has anyone ever heard that term? Okay, so this is a thing. This is a tool that they've used in development, and they've talked about this, and we might talk about this in the abstract, but it's basically a landscape where if you start out with like an embryo, one cell embryo, and you start to get this developmental process going, and you get this phenotype, and a brain starts to develop, and you get this adult brain eventually. This landscape is a sort of a map of all the paths that you can take. So theoretically, from a single cell organism, you can take any path you want from that. So theoretically, you could develop into a boxy organism that has no brain. But you don't do that because that's not really, you can't survive like that. So you have this combination of natural selection and also with, sort of viability concerns. So, if you have these phenotypes that, of course, you can't just suddenly sprout wings in development because your genotype doesn't allow for that. But you also have, environmental factors, like if you have, you have restricted sensory information, like I mentioned before, those it affects the shape of the neural networks that result. And so all these things are sort of like serial decision points in this landscape. And as you move through the landscape, you get these, you either go in one direction or another. And so eventually you end up at this endpoint in development. And it's a product of both the genotype and the environmental factors. And usually it's the same for most organisms. Like if you're of a certain species, you have a very restricted developmental space, or else, in development you die and you don't get to live because you're not a viable phenotype. So you have this restricted space of how you can, how development can unfold. And that's the idea. We don't talk about that in here. Maybe I should put that in this. I don't know if it's going to, because this is a neuroscience conference, it might confuse people. And I wish I had a visual, because it actually works very well when you see the visual. But if you think about like if you're familiar with like a fitness landscape, or you're familiar with like an energy landscape, or like gradient descent landscape, then it's a very similar concept. You have this landscape, you have points on it, and you have like peaks and valleys, and you have this path that goes through it, basically. So that's how a lot of people envision development as unfolding, and that's sort of where we're getting at with this. And we're basically saying that this AI is, going to unfold according to developmental principles, and that it has certain features, and that those features can help. It's unique in terms of how it can process information. So I hope that's enough for like a submission. If you have other things you can think of to add, please do so. Suggest them in the comments, and then we can submit this by Friday. And I think that, they're going to vote on the abstracts. So I think it's going to be like, if an abstract gets a lot of votes, it gets like upvoted and put in a good spot in the conference. So, we definitely want to be upvoted. So if you can contribute to that, I will add you as an author, and we will submit it collectively. I'm also, I'm submitting this abstract, and this is a little bit different. Jesse is involved in this, but no one else, I think, is familiar with in this group. So this is non-neuronal cognition. And so this is, if people are familiar with psychophysics, this is the psychophysics of non-neuronal cognition. And so I don't know which track this will fit into, but I'll read it quickly so that you can get a sense of what it is. Non-neuronal cognition can be used to explain what appear to be neural behaviors in cellular level systems. So in this case, we have a multi-cell colony it's an organism, but it's a multi-cell colony, and it has movement behaviors. And those movement behaviors are not controlled by a brain, but they do have these sort of intelligent movements that are look like they're generated by a brain. If you look at it, that's a pretty subjective thing, but if you look at it, it looks like it's generated by a brain. So people have used this non-neuronal cognition paradigm to explain cellular decision-making, information processing, and regenerative processes, and active perception amongst philopodia, which are cells, or parts of cells. And so these are all things, individual cells that don't have a brain, but they do have information processing mechanisms. And so if you're familiar with the idea of cognition as information processing, if you're familiar with the history of cognition, you know that people really cognition came out of this idea of information processing. So behaviorism is based on these sort of behaviorist type paradigms where you give a reward and that shapes the behavior. In cognition, you have information processing that shapes the behavior. So how is the information processed through the brain? And so we can use that principle in this kind of system that doesn't really have a nervous system, but it has analogs. And so we characterize movement among colonies of the diatom genus Basilaria. So diatoms are these marine microorganisms that are these multi-cell colonies that live together. And I don't have a picture of them today, but we do in our sister group, DevaWorm, we do work with these organisms. So we characterize movement among colonies of the diatom genus Basilaria as a collective pattern generator, and it's abbreviated COPG. So a CPG is a central pattern generator, and you find these a lot in insect nervous systems. And what it is basically a series of neurons that are wired together in like some sort of network, small network. And these networks synchronize rhythmic output. So you have something like a oscillatory movement, or you have a heart rate is sort of mediated by some sort of pacemaker, and that pacemaker is a CPG, or at least I don't know if it's formally a CPG, but the idea of a CPG is very similar to that, where you have this pattern. A lot of times when insects move their legs, they're moving their legs according to central pattern generators that are synchronized. And so, but these are, of course, generated by neurons. The COPG is generated by something else. It's generated by something in the cells that are interacting. And so, in this case of Basilaria, these collective pattern generators are produced by stretching motions from actin filaments in neighboring cells. You have two cells that are neighbors, and they're moving against one another, and their actin filaments are sort of acting to facilitate that movement. These synchronized movements propagate down the colony in an undulating accordion-like manner. So they move like an accordion. There are a bunch of them stacked side to side, and they're moving like an accordion. And so while we utilize a neural model to characterize the behavior of this type of multicellular colony, psychophysical models are used to characterize pseudoneuronal behaviors, or so while we can utilize, I should say. So we can utilize like something like a Kuromoto oscillator to characterize these behaviors. We can also use psychophysical models. And so psychophysics, of course, is this idea that you can look at like sensory inputs, and you can characterize this sort of information processing by looking at statistical regularities. So there, the nervous system can separate maybe a signal from noise, or it can, like in the case of the Weber-Fechner law, if you look at an array of numbers, like if you look at an array of dots, you can count the number of dots in a very small array, but in a very large array, you can't count the dots. And so then what you do is you introduce an array of dots, maybe 10 dots, and then you introduce an array of 100 dots. And of course, you can tell the difference between the two arrays because they're an order of magnitude difference, right? So immediately you can see that 100 dots are more than 10 dots without counting them. But then if you have like two arrays, one has 100 dots and one has 110 dots, and you flash them up and you ask people, is there a difference? Which one has more dots? They won't necessarily be able to tell. And so there's a law there that suggests that people will notice at some threshold when there are more dots present without counting them. It's just this sort of ability to sense the sort of density of the stimulus. And so you can actually do this for a number of things in behavior, movement, sensing light, sensing color, sensing number of things. And there's this function that results from this. So there's like some sort of curvilinear function that results from this ability, from this thresholding of noticing these qualities of the stimulus. And so in this case, we're going to explore these psychophysical models and how these colonies respond to things like light or things like movement by their neighbors and things like that. And so I have to work on this a little bit, but I just wanted to introduce it to people because you probably you'll see this and you'll have no idea what's going on. So there's some papers at the end that kind of show this non-neuronal cognition area and kind of discuss it in different contexts. So I didn't think anyone here was familiar with that area. Maybe Jesse knows a little bit about it, but if you're interested in non-neuronal cognition, I would read up on this. There are also some references on like non-neuronal cognition, like in bacteria and organisms like that. So we can talk about that if people are interested. I think it's an interesting area because it isn't typically what you think of when you think of like neuroscience, but there are like, we always assume that a brain has to be present to generate behavior or intelligent behavior. But it may be that it doesn't, and that's kind of where this is going. I think for the Neuromatch audience, that sort of introduction to the idea is crucial. So I might actually simplify this a bit, and I would welcome your comments. And you can be added as an author again by making comments and working with the abstract. So those are the abstracts for Neuromatch. Now let's get into the baby mind submission. This is, I think, a lot of people, I think Furkan was interested in this, Rashab, Jesse, I have some names here, but they can change again. Like if you contribute things, you can be added as an author. So there's no title. I don't have a working title for this, but this is being submitted to the Baby Minds workshop at NeurIPS. So there's I think it's run by a couple of people who do like, maybe like some developmental psychology. I think Gary Marcus is involved in it. So, and their idea is that you can, so they're already kind of sold on this idea of development as an inspiration for artificial intelligence. So this is a little bit different than the abstract for NeuroMatch. We don't have to sell people on anything here. What we have to do is kind of give them an idea of how, one aspect of developmental AI that might be something that no one has ever really considered before. So we're going to again turn to these developmental Brainwork vehicles. And so this paper is going to be like sort of flesh out what was in the NeuroMatch abstract. So some of the stuff in the NeuroMatch abstract that seems a little vague is going to be sort of explored in this paper. I hope, because the deadline for this is next Friday, just like the NeuroMatch papers or the abstracts, I hope we can finish this by next Friday and then submit them in tandem. And so this paper can actually be cited in the NeuroMatch abstract. For more information, see this paper. So people will be able to see maybe more detail about what the abstract is all about. So, so the idea here is that we're laying out this developmental Brainwork vehicle in a number of ways. We're looking at the topic of sort of developmental learning and this idea of developmental freedom. We're looking at spatially dependent embodiment. We're looking, of course, at the critical period, and then developmental freedom during the critical period or in relation to the critical period. And then there's a contingency analysis. And then I talked to Rishab maybe about adding something on, like maybe an example using reinforcement learning. But he never got back to me on that. Maybe he's still thinking about it. So if Rishab is watching this on YouTube, we're welcome to kind of run through that and maybe add it into the paper. But we have until this coming Friday. So the time is a little bit tight on it. So don't worry if you can't finish it, just let me know. Or if you want to add in something, maybe a shorter discussion on maybe how we might use reinforcement learning for this, let me know. So this is the abstract. And then, of course, it's 4 pages. The limit for this is 4 pages of text from introduction to the end of from abstract to the end of the discussion. So basically to here, this should be about 4 pages. And then there are a bunch of references here, which are in order, numbered order. So we keep numbering them as we go along and putting them in. I made a note here, this paper, to cite this paper in the body. Then you can also add methods in. So there are some methods. In this case, it might not be like particularly, rigorous in terms of like a full analysis. But if we have things that we want to define further, like, a concept or something else, we can put it in the methods section and explain it for people. So that's the idea. And this is an extended abstract. So it's it should be kind of brief in sort of the 4 pages that we have. And then this part will be more, of course, the references can be as long as they want. And then these methods will be, just to make everything very explicit to people. You have to make these papers self-contained, because if people have to keep looking to other references, they kind of get irritated. So usually they have to be self-contained. But that's the challenge, is to get it within 4 pages. So those are the submissions that we have coming up. I actually had this last week. I was sharing it at last week's meeting, so I updated it from last week. This is the NeuroMatch submission on developmental AI. So our deadline is in about a week. We have a 2 to 300 word abstract. So we still have some room in this abstract. This non-neuronal cognition abstract, which is due at the same time. I think we're close to the limit on that, but I think that can still be, changed a little bit. Then there's this Baby Minds workshop. So this is the URL for the Baby Minds workshop. Oops. Okay. Let me get it out. I'll put it in the chat so that people can look at the page for it and get a sense of what's going on there. So this is a workshop. This is in association with NeuroSim. The deliverable here is a 4-page paper with references and an appendix, which we put the methods in, or if you want to put something else in, if we need to have other methods spelled out, we'll figure that out. But we have 1 week to do this. And then interested, I have a bunch of names of people: Anson, Furkan, Akshara, Jesse, Rishab. So anyone who wants to be on this paper, let me know. And then, of course, comment. The rule is you comment on the paper to help shape it, and you have, you get an authorship credit. So this workshop is, I think, pretty relevant to our interests. We have a lot of things here. Neurocognitive learning systems, curiosity-driven self-supervised learning, object-centric representation and concept learning, developmental cognitive robotics, social and emotional developmental systems. So they're approaching development from a lot of different angles. And of course, they're thinking of human babies when they think of baby minds. But there are other types of minds that emerge maybe in nature. We don't, we just have to think about it maybe more broadly for artificial intelligence. But I think the idea is to have a bunch of people from different backgrounds coming together. That's really, I think, the important thing. So that's the one paper. And then there's another paper that's due a week later. And I don't know if this will actually happen, but people are particularly interested in this. There's another workshop to target. So if we want to target another workshop, we can write a paper that's sort of at a right angle to the Baby Minds paper. And this is the Novel Ideas for Training Neural Architectures workshop. And that's the link there, Beyond Backprop. So this is, again, workshop in association with NeuroSim. This one is a little bit different. It's not development. It's actually about novel neural architectures. So this deadline is in 2 weeks. This is, basically taking this idea. So we have this idea in the lab of these metabrain models, which are where you combine 2 or more models in a layered fashion. And we wrote this paper for a workshop last summer, DevoNN. So it's Devo Neural Networks. And the idea was to build these, they're AI systems that are like stacked with different layers, and the different layers are different degrees of representation. So we start at the bottom with something that's a very low representation model. And then we add on top of that a higher level of representation, maybe like a symbolic representation. So you have like a data processing layer maybe, and then you have a symbolic layer above it. And those two things are combined, and they are used to process information in a way that's maybe different than what you would get with like maybe a normal robot or neural network. So we use these DBVs for this, and we added another type of model on top of it that added context. And then we explored those two things in tandem in this workshop. And so if you're interested in the paper, I can re-up the paper and send it to you. It should be easily accessible, but I can send you the actual paper. I don't remember who's seen it and who's not seen it, but I know Jesse's seen it, of course, but I don't think everyone else is familiar with it. But we did do this paper, and so this would be kind of following up on that paper. It would be like exploring these layers and exploring, how our models, our metabrain models can sort of, how they might contribute to this area. So this isn't as good of a fit for this idea isn't as good of a fit for a novel ideas for training neuroarchitectures workshop as the Baby Minds paper is for the Baby Minds workshop. But it's just an opportunity. If it doesn't make it into that conference, we can do something else with it. But it's a good opportunity to get things out of your mind, and maybe engage with some of the literature a bit, and we can always use it for something else. And so that's pretty much it. I have this feedback loops data set and plan. So again, we should aim for a blog post maybe in the next maybe month or two, maybe concurrent with NMA3, and then post the blog post to Twitter for some buzz. So, as people are thinking about NMA, you would put it out. And then, of course, if there's an NMA4, we could just wait for that. But that would be the idea. So I think that's a good intermediate point from producing a full manuscript. I know producing a full manuscript is really daunting to a lot of people. And it's even a 4-page thing is hard to get going on and completing, but a manuscript is always very long process. So anything that can I'm always a believer in facilitating it with things like blog posts and other things. It helps you think, you're right, get your ideas clarified and other things. So those are all the things, and it's very busy. But I think this is a good plan forward. Again, if we don't make the deadline for the second workshop paper, we can submit it somewhere else. But I don't have the version of that ready yet. I'll probably wait until we're pretty close with the Baby Minds paper and then put that out for circulation. So do we have any comments or questions or?
I can say some things about them. I'm interested in the Baby Minds workshop, and I read the abstract and the two references that mentioned there, DeVoynan paper, and there was another one, Breitenberg Vehicles as Developmental Neurosimulation paper.
Yeah.
The 5th one and the 7th one. I examined them. I'm trying to understand the main idea. I have some glimpse on them, but Breitenberg vehicles, I think the original ones were the representation free, and they weren't learnable systems, right? They were hard coded things.
Yeah.
I think, and you have turned them in the developmental work. You have turned them into a representational model. In them, there are some neural network kind of things, and they are learnable. And this is a whole change. I think this is a whole change of the Breitenberg vehicles. Is it really the relation with the original one? I see the developmental Breitenberg vehicles as the special case of the reinforcement learning models. It's doing any task with in any environment with some sensors and effectors. It is just a special case with the Breitenberg vehicles on. I saw them like that. It is right. Did I get that right?
You mean is there? Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's basically right. So the connection with reinforcement learning, is that what you're suggesting? That there's that's basically there's a form of reinforcement learning going on, or?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be fleshed out more. We're kind of if the first paper that we wrote on it, we attacked it from a bunch of different angles, and so we had a number of we used, for example, a genetic algorithm to determine the topology. We also used Hebbian learning to determine the topology. So we've done things like that, and that's in the. You'll see that if you read the papers, there are instances where those things have been demonstrated. So it's a special case of the Brainwork vehicle in that it's you're sort of adding in elements to the topology, but you're also kind of thinking more about leveraging the elements of the embodied elements of the Brainwork vehicles and the sensors, and how you might take like environmental information and process it. So it's like it's a step above like the traditional thought experiment where you're actually thinking now, okay, what is this? What is the power of embodiment, for example? What is embodiment doing? Why is, because there's a debate actually in the literature about why embodiment is important. Some people talk about it like it's like magic, and other people are skeptical. So the question is like, what is it about embodiment that like makes it so powerful or not powerful? And so we've shown kind of, and we never really shown this like definitively, but is that you have this, you can embed something in an environment, it moves around and it can sample the environment in different ways, and it can take that information and integrate it. So it's like an organism, as opposed to like a disembodied neural network, can actually sample the environment in different ways, from different perspectives, or it can like actually move in the environment and say that there's a tree here and it's moving, and then there's like a tree in context with other things. And so so we're kind of going beyond the original sort of thought experiment aspect of it, but we're also not like doing these, very focused experiments that will be definitive. I think that's where we are right now with that. So I think, there are a lot of open questions about what we're doing, and the implications of it. So if you have some opinions or like potential things that we need to pay attention to, let us know.
Like, I think the more emphasis you gave with the recent literature on the reinforcement learning, like what is the differences between the developmental Brainwork vehicles and the current research on the like mostly on the continual learning, on reinforcement learning, and the differences between these two concepts may be beneficial for the abstract, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to address that, but I think we'll. Hi, Jesse. Hi, Akshara. People are turning on their cameras. Yeah, so I think that's a good connection. I wasn't quite sure how we might make that explicit, but yeah, if you know of a good way to like make that, like if you know of a good reference or like a good bridge that we can point out in the paper, that would be good.
Yeah, like I'm mostly a like computer vision and generative model guy. Like I know some things on the reinforcement learning, but I'm not an expert. But like I have seen some research on literature about this continual learning and the reinforcement learning, and I might say that like there are some relations between this abstract and those literature.
Okay.
But that's all I can do right now.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Akshara, did you have anything to say or mention?
Yeah, it's my like I'm getting back to all my stuff. I could like I just it really seems very interesting to me, and I work on like I work on the week on all the possible things I could like on all the days, and yeah, I would get back to you with the stuff like after reviewing and after reading by my own, and then I'll get back to you.
Good. Yeah, I look forward to it. Yeah, I think it'll be a good opportunity.
Even the non-neuronal, the psychophysics of the non-neuronal cells are. I mean, I have read quite, but I'm not very deep into it. I just have a very superficial idea about it. So I just thought I would have. I mean, I would read on all this stuff and then I'll get back to you. Yeah, those were really quite interesting to me. I would get back to you after reading and doing research into it.
Yeah, that's good. Anson?
I also definitely need to read through the different articles, and depending on how hectic this week is, might put comments in.
Okay. That's good. Jesse?
Hey, yeah, I don't have a lot of things to add other than that. I appreciate the new things that people suggested or brought up. I'm fun to hear that. I'll definitely be probably the major focus of next week for me will be um, these these submissions and some of the things related to them. So I'm game for that. And like I said, I'm I'm definitely on board for a lot of the developmental AI that's being kind of the work going into the Baby Minds workshop. Really interesting to glad to see that, and glad that people are interested in that. And I'm really curious what we're going to turn out, because we have a short amount of time to finish that submission paper, but there's a lot to follow up with it and a lot to follow up on, like at NeuroMatch, and I think it'll be a really interesting way to synthesize a lot of things that have been going on here in the lab and in general interest around the lab. So that's cool. But yeah, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, thanks for your comments. Again, I have them in Slack right now, but I can repost them in Slack. The links to the abstracts, so they're shareable documents. If you need access, sometimes the access is a little malfunctions. So just request access, and I'll give it to you, and then you can put in your comments and just put them in comments. Like highlight the thing that you wanted to, or the place maybe we thought maybe it would be good to add something, or and then we'll sort through the comments, but probably by next Saturday these will be submitted. So we can go through what we have submitted. So that'll be I think that'll be interesting to see what we actually finally come up with. And then the NeurIPS is, I think, at the beginning of December, so it's all virtual, and it's, I think, for students, I think it's a $50 registration fee. So it's actually a pretty decent. I mean, like NeurIPS, if you were to go live, it would be like well over $1,000. So it would be, it's a good opportunity to, because they have a very well run virtual conference, and you would get to attend the whole conference. This would be like a workshop that's like an aside thing, but it's still it's pretty well attended.
There may also be some opportunities to volunteer. Like I know they had a volunteer application that I fill out, but I don't know if that's still open or whatever else. So you can always for things like that, sometimes let you get in. So you don't have to do that.
Yeah, I remember doing that like a long time when one of my first conferences, and actually I think it was Sig Kai, that I volunteered for. It was in the city where I was living at the time, and so I was like, oh, I got to go to this. So I volunteered, and it's like you student volunteer, you get to attend all the sessions, but you have to you have to do something to be like, you have to run something, or like there are different tasks that you do, but basically a lot of times they'll pay for your registration fee. So I mean, it's a good experience to be involved in it. So, anyways, and then of course NeuroMatch is at the end of October, and so that's all virtual, and we know about that already. But I think that'll be a good opportunity, NeuroMatch as well, because you have. I think you have an audience there. It's pretty diverse, so we'll see how we get what kind of feedback we get from that. Okay, well, thanks for attending. And if you have anything you wanted to mention, well, we'll have the abstracts to comment on, and then if you need to mention anything else, you can contact us, me or anyone else in Slack. Otherwise, hope to see you next week. See you online before then. Okay.
Great to see everybody. Take care.
Have a good week.
Thanks.